Guardala questa stupida vecchia, sempre interferisce nella nostra vita. Look at this stupid old woman, always interfering in our lives. Those words, spoken in rapid Italian by my daughter-in-law Sofia, cut through me like a blade as I stood in her pristine kitchen doorway that October evening. She was speaking to her mother, Maria, who was visiting from New York, both of them glancing at me with barely concealed disdain as I entered carrying the apple pie I'd baked for our family dinner. If you're watching this, hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. Marcus, my son, was in the living room watching football, completely oblivious to the venom being spewed about his mother just 20 feet away. Sophia smiled sweetly at me, her dark eyes cold as winter stones. "Oh, Abigail, you shouldn't have gone to the trouble," she said in her practiced English, taking the pie from my hands with exaggerated care. "You know how hard it is for you to get around at your age." I smiled back, playing the part I'd been playing for 3 years since Marcus married this woman, the harmless, slightly confused widow from Iowa, the burden they tolerated out of obligation. "It's no trouble at all, dear," I replied, keeping my voice soft and grateful. "I just want to contribute something to our lovely family dinners." Behind me, I heard Maria mutter in Italian, "She probably can't even cook properly anymore. Why doesn't Marcus put her in a home?" Sophia laughed, a tinkling sound like breaking glass. "Patience, Mama. Soon enough." I kept my expression pleasantly blank, but inside, my mind was racing. After 40 years of marriage to Antonio Rossi, yes, Marcus's father had been Italian from Sicily, I spoke the language as fluently as I spoke English. I understood every word, every slight, every cruel assumption they made about the stupid Americas, a can grandmother, who couldn't possibly understand their native tongue. Marcus appeared in the doorway, handsome in his father's way, but lacking Antonio's sharp intelligence. "Mom, you look tired. Maybe you should rest more at home instead of driving all the way over here for dinner." The concern in his voice was genuine, but it stung. Even my own son saw me as fragile, declining, someone to be managed rather than respected. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I assured him, patting his arm with a trembling hand I deliberately made shakier than it was. "Family dinners are the highlight of my week." Sophia exchanged a meaningful look with her mother. In Italian, she said, "See how she guilt trips him? Pathetic. At least when she's gone, we won't have to pretend anymore." I helped set the table, my hands steady despite the rage building inside me like a carefully banked fire. For 3 years, I'd watched Sophia manipulate my son, isolate him from his friends, and gradually convince him that his aging mother was becoming a burden he needed to manage, and all the while she'd been speaking about me in Italian, believing I was too ignorant, too American, too old to understand. During dinner, she continued her performance, cutting my food into smaller pieces without asking, speaking slowly and loudly as if I were deaf, patting my hand condescendingly when I reached for the salt. "Abigail, Marcus and I have been talking," Sophia said as we finished the main course. "We think it might be time for you to consider downsizing. Maybe one of those nice senior communities where you'd have people to look after you." Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Mom, we just worry about you being alone in that big house. What if something happened?" I looked at my son, my only child, the boy I'd raised alone after his father died when he was 12, and saw a stranger, a man who'd been so thoroughly manipulated that he genuinely believed shipping his mother off to a nursing home was an act of love. "I'll think about it," I said quietly, my voice just the right amount of defeated. Sophia smiled triumphantly. In Italian, she told her mother, "Perfect. Once she's out of the way, we can get our hands on whatever money she's hoarding. Marcus says she must have some savings tucked away." But Sophia made one critical mistake that night. She assumed a 68-year-old widow from Iowa knew nothing about business or the Italian language. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. As I drove home from that dinner, my hands gripping the steering wheel of my sensible Honda Civic, I let my mind wander back to who I really was, not the diminished version of myself I'd been performing for my son's family. Before you hear what I did next, please hit that subscribe button. This story gets much more satisfying, and I think you'll want to follow along to the end. My name is Abigail Thompson, though for 30 years it was Abigail Rossi. I wasn't always the quiet widow living in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of Cedar Falls. Once upon a time, I was the CEO of Midwest Agricultural Solutions, a company I built from the ground up after Antonio died. I spoke 4 languages fluently: English, Italian, Spanish, and enough German to negotiate contracts with European suppliers. I held an MBA from Northwestern and had spent 3 decades building a multi-million-dollar agricultural technology business before selling it 5 years ago. But after Marcus married Sophia, I made a conscious decision to step back, to observe. Something about her had never sat right with me. The way she appeared whenever Marcus mentioned family money, how she'd isolated him from his college friends, the calculated nature of her affection. So I became what she expected, the helpless grandmother, the burden, the woman who needed to be managed. They saw what they wanted to see, a lonely widow to be managed and controlled. Antonio would have seen through Sophia in a heartbeat. My late husband had been born in Palermo, immigrated to Iowa as a teenager, and brought with him a Sicilian's instinct for recognizing predators. He'd taught me Italian during our courtship, and after his death, I'd continued studying it as a way to stay connected to his memory. His family in Sicily had become my family, and I'd spent enough summers in Palermo to speak the language like a native. Marcus didn't know about the 3 rental properties I owned in downtown Cedar Falls, or the investment portfolio worth just over $2 million, or the fact that I'd been quietly funding his business expansion for the past 2 years through anonymous loans his bank attributed to private investors. I'd been playing chess while everyone else played checkers. The following week, Sophia's demands escalated. She arrived at my house unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon, her designer handbag and perfectly styled hair at odds with the concerned expression she wore. "Abigail, I hope you don't mind me stopping by," she said, settling herself on my floral sofa with practiced ease. "Marcus and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if you started contributing more to household expenses when you visit. Maybe $50 per dinner? It would help offset the grocery costs, and it would make you feel more involved." I blinked at her, letting confusion cloud my features. $50? For dinner? "I know it seems like a lot, but good food is expensive," Sophia continued, her voice taking on that patient tone people use with children and the elderly. "And if you're going to keep coming over twice a week, well, Marcus's business isn't doing as well as it used to." That was interesting. Marcus ran a successful accounting firm, and I knew for a fact his revenues had increased 30% over the past year. Where was that money going? "Of course, dear," I said, reaching for my checkbook with deliberately shaky hands. "I just want to be helpful to the family." Sophia's smile was radiant as she watched me write the check. "You're so understanding, Abigail. Not every mother-in-law would be so cooperative." After she left, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the canceled check stub. $50 for a meal that cost maybe $15 to prepare. It wasn't about the money, it was about power, about establishing hierarchy, about training me to accept whatever terms she set. But as I would learn in the weeks that followed, Sophia was playing a much deeper game than simple financial extortion. I began watching more carefully during family dinners. Sophia would speak Italian to her mother whenever I was in the room, and their conversations revealed layers of planning I hadn't anticipated. They discussed my house, wondering about its value. They speculated about my finances, making increasingly bold assumptions about what they'd find when they eventually gained access to my accounts. Most chilling of all, they talked about accelerating the timeline. "The sooner we can get her declared incompetent, the sooner Marcus gets power of attorney," Sophia had said during one dinner while I was supposedly in the bathroom. My cousin Elena dealt with her husband's grandmother the same way. A few medical evaluations, some documentation of confusion and forgetfulness, and the courts sign right off on it. As Sophia's demands became more brazen, I decided it was time to do some research on my dear daughter-in-law's family background. The first thing I learned about Sophia Rossi was that everything she'd told Marcus about her family was a lie. I spent the following Saturday morning in my home office, a room Sophia had never seen, hidden behind what she assumed was a coat closet, making phone calls and conducting internet research with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent 30 years in business. Sophia claimed her family owned a successful chain of Italian restaurants in New York. The truth was more modest. They owned one restaurant, Bella Milano, located in a declining neighborhood in Queens. The Yelp reviews were mixed. The photos showed worn decor, and according to the commercial real estate websites I consulted, the building had been for sale for 8 months. My next call was to David Brennan, a commercial real estate broker I'd worked with during my business days. David owed me several favors, and more importantly, he specialized in restaurant properties. "Abigail Thompson, I haven't heard from you in years." David's voice boomed through my phone. "How's retirement treating you?" "I'm considering an investment opportunity, David. There's a restaurant in Queens called Bella Milano. What can you tell me about it?" The pause was telling. "Oh, that property. The Rossi family has been trying to unload it for months. They're asking $800,000, but between you and me, they'd probably take $600 in cash. The neighborhood's gentrifying, so the real estate value is solid, but the business itself," he trailed off diplomatically. "What about the business?" "Let's just say they're highly motivated sellers. The pandemic hit them hard, they took on significant debt, and now they're struggling to keep the lights on. Good people, from what I hear, just caught in a bad situation." After hanging up with David, I called a private investigator I'd used for due diligence during business acquisitions. Within 48 hours, I had a complete financial picture of the Rossi family situation. They owed $200,000 in back taxes, had maxed out 3 business lines of credit, and were 3 months behind on their commercial mortgage. Most interesting of all, Sophia had been sending money to her parents from Marcus's personal account, money Marcus didn't know about. The private investigator's report showed electronic transfers totaling $45,000 over the past 18 months, all sent to Bella Milano LLC, with memo lines like family support and emergency assistance. Sophia had been systematically draining Marcus's savings to prop up her family's failing restaurant, while simultaneously planning to have me declared incompetent so she could access what she assumed were my assets. That evening, I attended another family dinner, armed with knowledge that transformed every conversation. When Sophia's mother, Maria, mentioned missing the old neighborhood in Queens, I knew she was talking about the restaurant they were about to lose. When Sophia casually asked Marcus about his business finances, I recognized it as intelligence gathering. During coffee, Sophia stepped out to take a phone call. Through the kitchen window, I could see her pacing on the back patio, speaking rapid Italian into her phone. "Mama, we can't wait much longer," she was saying. "The bank is threatening foreclosure, and Papa's too proud to tell them we're broke. If we can't send more money by the end of the month, we'll lose everything." She paused, listening, then continued. "No, Marcus doesn't suspect anything. He thinks the money is going to my student loans. And the old woman still acts like she doesn't understand a word we're saying. Once we get her into assisted living, Marcus will have to sell her house, and we can access whatever she's been hiding." I sipped my coffee, watching my daughter-in-law plan my financial destruction with the casual efficiency of a corporate raider. But what Sophia didn't know was that her family's pride, their desperate need to keep up appearances while their world crumbled, had just given me the perfect opportunity for what my late husband would have called a Sicilian solution. Pride goes before a fall, and Sophia was about to learn Tao. Hat lesson in the most expensive way possible. While Sophia was busy planning how to squeeze more money from my son, I was making some calls to old business contacts. It was time to put my retirement investments to good use. The next morning, I called David Brennan at exactly 9 a.m. "David, it's Abigail Thompson. I want to make an offer on the Bella Milano property." "Abigail, I have to ask, do you know anything about running a restaurant? It's not like your agricultural business." I smiled, settling back in my home office chair. "Let's just say I have a personal interest in this particular establishment. Can you arrange a direct meeting with the owners? I'd prefer to handle this quietly, through a shell company." "Of course. How much are you thinking?" $650,000, cash, close in 2 weeks. But I have conditions. The current owners can stay on as managers if they wish, and I want to preserve the existing recipes and family traditions. This isn't about profit, it's about preserving something important. Within 24 hours, David had arranged a meeting with Giuseppe and Maria Rossi at their restaurant. I arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when the lunch rush had ended, wearing my best business suit for the first time in months. The restaurant was exactly as I'd imagined from the photos. Tired but dignified, with checkered tablecloths and faded murals of the Italian countryside. Giuseppe Rossi was a small, proud man with calloused hands and worried eyes. His wife Maria, Sophia's mother, looked exhausted in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible choices. "Mrs. Thompson," Giuseppe said in heavily accented English, "your broker says you want to buy our restaurant. But why? You know nothing about us." I made a decision in that moment that would change everything. "Actually, Mr. Rossi, I know quite a bit about your family," I said, switching to fluent Italian. "I know you've been struggling to keep your family's legacy alive. I know your daughter has been sending you money her husband doesn't know about. And I know you're good people caught in a bad situation through no fault of your own." Maria's eyes widened. Giuseppe looked suspicious. "How do you know these things? Who are you?" "I'm someone who understands the value of family recipes and honest work," I replied, still speaking Italian. "I'm also someone who can offer you a way to save your restaurant and your pride." I explained my offer. I would purchase the restaurant for $650,000 cash, enough to clear their debts and give them a fresh start. They could stay on as managers with full salaries and benefits. The family recipes would remain with the family. And most importantly, the sale would remain confidential until I was ready to reveal it. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Giuseppe asked. "Because you're not strangers," I said simply. "You're Sophia's parents, which makes you family. And family should take care of each other, honestly." The closing took place the following Friday. I signed the papers as the managing partner of Thompson Holdings LLC, a company I'd established years earlier for property investments. Giuseppe and Maria signed with tears in their eyes, finally free from the crushing debt that had been destroying their health and their marriage. "This buyer wants to keep the family recipes and honor our legacy," Giuseppe told his wife as we finished the paperwork. But I wasn't finished with my chess moves. That same evening, I attended dinner at Marcus and Sophia's house, where Sophia continued her performance of concern and manipulation. "Abigail, you seem distracted tonight," she said, cutting my chicken into small pieces without asking. "Are you feeling all right? Maybe we should schedule you a doctor's appointment." "I'm fine, dear," I replied, allowing my voice to sound just slightly confused. "Just thinking about things." Sophia and her mother exchanged glances. In Italian, Sophia said, "See how she's starting to lose focus? This is perfect timing for the competency evaluation." Marcus, finishing his second glass of wine, looked genuinely worried. "Mom, Sophia and I have been talking. Her family's going through some financial difficulties, and I was wondering if you might be able to help out. Maybe a loan of $50,000? I know it sounds like a lot, but $50,000? I blinked rapidly, letting fear creep into my voice. "Marcus, I don't have that kind of money just lying around." Sophia leaned forward, her predatory instincts activated. "Mom Thompson, we know you must have some savings. The house, your pension, maybe some investments. We're not asking for charity. It would be a loan with interest." In Italian, she told her mother, "That old bat probably has money hidden away. Marcus says she's always been cheap about spending." I looked between my son and his wife, seeing the trap they'd laid. Marcus genuinely believed he was helping Sophia's family while protecting his aging mother's interests. Sophia knew exactly what she was doing, creating a financial emergency that would force me to reveal my assets, making it easier to claim I needed help managing them. I suppose I could look into it," I said finally. "Maybe talk to my bank." Sophia's smile was radiant. "You're so generous, Mom Thompson. Sophia's parents will be so grateful." As I signed the papers, making me the new owner of Bella Milano, Sophia was at my kitchen table, explaining to Marcus why I should be moved to assisted living. She had no idea her world was about to change forever. The next phase of my plan required patience and careful documentation. I knew that when I finally revealed the truth, I needed irrefutable evidence of Sophia's deception and theft. So I began building a case with the thoroughness of someone who'd spent decades in business negotiations. First, I installed a discreet recording app on my phone, perfectly legal in Iowa, where only one party needs to consent to recording conversations. Every family dinner became an evidence-gathering opportunity. The recordings were damning. Sophia and her mother spoke freely in Italian, believing I couldn't understand, and their conversations revealed the full scope of their manipulation. "Once we get rid of the old woman," Sophia said during one dinner while Marcus was outside grilling, "we'll have access to everything. My lawyer friend says the competency hearing should be straightforward, especially if we can show she's been making irrational financial decisions." "What kind of decisions?" Maria asked. "I'm going to convince her to lend us money for the restaurant. 50,000, maybe more. Then we'll claim she's being financially exploited and needs protection. Marcus will get power of attorney, and once we control her accounts, we can move the money wherever we need it." But the recordings revealed something even more sinister. Sophia hadn't just been stealing from Marcus's personal accounts. She'd been embezzling from his business. I hired a forensic accountant, someone I'd worked with during my corporate days, to examine Marcus's financial records. What we discovered made my blood run cold. Over the past 2 years, Sophia had systematically drained nearly $80,000 from Marcus's accounting firm. She'd been forging his signature on checks, setting up fake vendor accounts, and redirecting client payments to accounts she controlled. My son was facing potential criminal liability, profession, sanctions, and financial ruin, and he had no idea. The forensic accountant, Patricia Wong, met me at my house on a Thursday afternoon with a thick folder of evidence. "Mrs. Thompson, this is one of the most sophisticated cases of spousal financial abuse I've ever documented," Patricia said, spreading bank statements across my dining room table. "Your daughter-in-law has been running what amounts to an embezzlement operation, using your son's business as a front." "Can Marcus recover from this?" I asked. "If we can prove he had no knowledge of the theft, yes, but we need to act quickly. If clients discover their payments have been redirected, your son could face criminal charges as well as civil lawsuits." That evening, I met with my attorney, Robert Morrison, a sharp young lawyer who'd handled my business transactions during the sale of my company. "Mrs. Thompson, you have grounds for several legal actions here," Robert said after reviewing the evidence. "Financial elder abuse, fraud, embezzlement, and potentially racketeering if we can prove this was part of a larger conspiracy." "I don't want revenge," I told him firmly. "I want justice and protection for my son. Sophia has put Marcus in legal jeopardy, and she's been planning to have me declared incompetent to steal whatever assets she thinks I have." Robert made notes as I spoke. "We can file for restraining orders, freeze the fraudulent accounts, and prepare criminal referrals. But the most important thing is protecting your son's business and professional reputation." As we discussed legal strategy, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. "Mom, can you come to dinner Saturday? Sophia wants to discuss your living situation." I showed Robert the message. "I think Saturday might be the perfect time to reveal what I've discovered. But first, I have one more surprise to arrange." The final piece of my plan involved Ella Milano restaurant. I called Giuseppe Rossi and explained what I needed. "Mr. Rossi, this Saturday I'd like to bring my family to the restaurant for dinner. There are some things they need to learn about respect and honesty, and I think your dining room would be the perfect place for that conversation." Giuseppe was quiet for a moment. "Mrs. Thompson, Sophia is our daughter, but what she has done to you and your son, it brings shame to our family name. We will help you however we can." Armed with evidence and legal protections, it was time for the family meeting that would change everything. But first, I had one more surprise to arrange at Bella Milano. Saturday evening arrived with the crisp promise of October in Iowa. I dressed carefully for dinner, not in my usual cardigan and sensible shoes, but in the navy blue suit I'd worn to board meetings, with my good pearls and the confident bearing of someone who'd spent 30 years commanding corporate boardrooms. Marcus picked me up at 6 o'clock, chattering nervously about Sophia's plans for the evening. "Mom, I know this conversation might be difficult, but Sophia really thinks it's time we made some decisions about your future," he said as we drove through downtown Cedar Falls. "Maybe looking at some of those senior communities wouldn't be such a bad idea." "I'm sure Sophia knows what's best," I replied mildly, watching familiar landmarks pass by the car window. We arrived at Bella Milano just as the dinner rush was beginning. The restaurant looked different somehow, cleaner, brighter, with fresh flowers on every table and new energy in the air. Giuseppe Rossi greeted us at the door, his eyes meeting mine with a mixture of respect and conspiracy. "Welcome to Bella Milano," he said in careful English. "Your table is ready." Sophia was already seated when we arrived, looking stunning in a black dress that probably cost more than Giuseppe's weekly grocery budget. Her mother Maria hovered nearby, nervous energy radiating from her small frame. "Abigail, you look different tonight," Sophia said, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in my appearance. "I thought this was a special occasion," I replied, settling into my chair with deliberate grace. Maria served us personally, fresh bread, magnificent antipasto, and the restaurant's famous ossobuco. The food was exceptional, prepared with the love and skill that had sustained 3 generations of the Rossi family. As we ate, Sophia launched into her prepared speech about my future. "Mom Thompson, Marcus and I have been doing research about senior living options," she began, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. "There's a lovely place called Sunset Manor that has everything you'd need: medical care, social activities, people your own age to talk to." "It sounds expensive," I said, playing my role one last time. "Well, that's what we wanted to discuss. The cost is about $4,000 a month, but we think selling your house would cover the fees for several years, and any remaining assets could be managed more professionally." Marcus nodded reluctantly. "Mom, we just want what's best for you. Managing finances gets harder as we get older." I looked around the restaurant, at the murals depicting the Italian countryside, at Giuseppe's proud bearing as he supervised the kitchen, at Maria's nervous hands as she refilled water glasses. This was the moment I'd been building toward for months. "Before we discuss my future," I said, rising from my chair, "I think there are some conversations we need to have about honesty and respect." I walked to where Giuseppe was standing and in clear, perfect Italian said, "Giuseppe, Maria, thank you for the beautiful meal in my restaurant." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia's fork clattered to her plate. Marcus stared at me as if I'd suddenly sprouted wings. How do you speak Italian?" Sophia stammered. "How do you own—" I returned to the table, no longer the confused widow, but the woman who'd built a multi-million-dollar business from nothing. "Sophia, I've understood every word you've said about me for the past 3 years," I said calmly. "Every insult, every cruel joke, every plan you've made to steal from my son and have me declared incompetent." I placed a folder on the table, copies of bank statements, recordings, transcripts, and legal documents. "Marcus, your wife has stolen over $80,000 from your business accounts. She's been forging your signature, creating fake vendor accounts, and redirecting client payments. You could face criminal charges because of her actions." Marcus's face went white as he opened the folder. "Sophia, is this true? Did you steal from my business?" Sophia's composure cracked like ice in spring. We needed the money for my family. You don't understand the pressure." "Oh, but I do understand," I continued, my voice steady and implacable. "I understand that you've been systematically manipulating my son while planning to rob him blind. I understand that you've been trying to isolate me from my family so you could steal whatever assets you assumed I had. And I understand that you made the mistake of underestimating a woman who spent 30 years in business." I gestured around the restaurant. "This morning, I completed the purchase of Bella Milano for $650,000 cash. Your parents are now my employees, with full salaries and benefits. The restaurant they built with their blood and sweat is safe, and their financial difficulties are over." Sophia stared at me as if I were speaking in tongues. You bought our restaurant? But how? Where did you get that kind of money?" "From the sale of Midwest Agricultural Solutions, the company I built and ran for 30 years, I replied. "The same company that generated the $2.3 million I currently have in investment accounts you'll never touch because you'll be far too busy dealing with criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud." As Sophia sat in stunned silence, surrounded by evidence of her deceptions, I realized this was just the beginning. The legal consequences were about to unfold. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a Swiss watch, because I'd spent months preparing for this moment. Robert Morrison, my attorney, had been waiting in the restaurant's back office with Detective Sarah Chen from the Cedar Falls Police Department. At my signal, they emerged with arrest warrants that had been signed that afternoon. "Sophia Rossi, Detective Chen said, approaching our table with professional calm. You're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and financial elder abuse. You have the right to remain silent. The restaurant fell silent as other diners turned to watch. Sophia's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally terror as the handcuffs clicked into place. "This isn't over!" she screamed as Detective Chen led her toward the door. "Marcus, don't let her do this to me. I'm your wife." But Marcus was staring at the bank statement spread across our table, his face a mask of betrayal and dawning comprehension. $80,000, he whispered. "Sophia, how could you steal from my clients, from our future?" Maria Rossi approached our table, tears streaming down her weathered face. In Italian, she said, "Mrs. Thompson, we are so sorry. We raised her better than this. The shame she has brought on our family name." "Maria," I replied gently in Italian, "you and Giuseppe are good people caught in your daughter's web of lies. You're not responsible for her choices." Giuseppe joined his wife, his hands shaking. As he spoke, "Mrs. Thompson, we cannot accept your generosity. You bought our restaurant to save it from our daughter's crimes." "You didn't just save our business," Maria added. "You saved our marriage, our pride, our family legacy. How can we ever repay you?" I looked at this elderly couple, hard-working, honest people who'd sacrificed everything to build something meaningful, and saw my own parents, who'd taught me that respect is earned through integrity, not demanded through fear. "You repay me by continuing to make the best ossobuco in Iowa," I said, squeezing Maria's hand, "and by helping me teach the community that family businesses built on honesty and love are worth preserving." Over the following weeks, the legal proceedings moved forward with devastating efficiency. The forensic accountant's report led to criminal charges not just for the theft from Marcus's business, but for a pattern of financial fraud that extended back nearly 3 years. Sophia's scheme had been breathtakingly bold. She'd been running what amounted to a shell game with multiple accounts, using Marcus's professional reputation and business credentials to establish credit lines and vendor relationships that existed only to funnel money to her family's restaurant. But the restaurant had been failing anyway, not because of Giuseppe and Maria's cooking or work ethic, but because Sophia had been skimming from their revenue to fund her lifestyle, creating a downward spiral of debt and desperation. Marcus, once he understood the full scope of his wife's betrayal, surprised me with his strength. "Mom," he said during one of our meetings with the attorneys, "I'm so sorry I didn't see what was happening. I let her convince me that you were becoming a burden when you were the only one looking out for my best interests." "Son," I replied, "Sophia is very good at manipulation. She told you what you wanted to hear about caring for your aging mother while systematically destroying your professional reputation and financial security." The divorce proceedings began immediately. With evidence of financial fraud and emotional abuse, Marcus's attorney was able to secure protective orders and freeze all joint accounts. Sophia would get nothing from the marriage except legal bills and a criminal record. But the most satisfying justice came from an unexpected source: the business community. Word spread quickly through Cedar Falls about what had happened. Marcus's clients, learning that he'd been the victim of systematic theft by his own wife, rallied around him with new contracts and referrals. His business, which I'd feared might be destroyed by Sophia's crimes, actually grew stronger as the community showed their support for a local family business owner who'd been betrayed by someone he trusted. And Bella Milano? The restaurant experienced a renaissance that surprised everyone, including me. Giuseppe and Maria, freed from the crushing debt and emotional manipulation they'd endured for years, threw themselves into their work with renewed passion. They updated the menu, refreshed the decor, and began hosting community events that turned the restaurant into a gathering place for families and friends. 6 months later, as I watched my son rebuilding his life and the restaurant thriving under honest management, I reflected on the lessons learned by everyone involved. The morning sun streamed through the windows of Bella Milano as I reviewed the quarterly financial reports Giuseppe had prepared. It was 8 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the restaurant wouldn't open for lunch for another 4 hours. But Giuseppe insisted on arriving early to prep for the day and review operations with me. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, setting a perfect cappuccino in front of me, "I have good news. We're booked solid for the next 3 weekends, and the catering orders for holiday parties are already coming in." I smiled, scanning the numbers. In the 8 months since I'd purchased the restaurant, revenue had increased by 60%. More importantly, Giuseppe and Maria looked 10 years younger, their faces bright with pride instead of shadowed by worry. "And Maria's cooking classes?" I asked. "Full every Saturday," Giuseppe beamed. 12 people each week, learning to make real Italian food. She loves teaching the traditional recipes. The cooking classes had been Maria's idea, a way to share her family's culinary traditions with the Cedar Falls community, while generating additional revenue for the restaurant. Watching her guide suburban mothers through the intricacies of homemade pasta had become one of my favorite Saturday morning activities. Marcus arrived at 9, carrying coffee and pastries from the bakery next door. My son looked healthier than he had in years. The stress lines around his eyes had faded, and he'd regained the easy smile I remembered from his childhood. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek before sitting down across from me. "How are the books looking?" "Better than I dared hope," I replied. "Giuseppe and Maria have turned this place into exactly what a neighborhood restaurant should be." Marcus opened his laptop and began reviewing the legal documents we'd come to discuss. Sophia's criminal trial was scheduled to begin in 6 weeks, and the civil proceedings to recover the stolen money would follow immediately after. "The prosecutor thinks Sophia will take a plea deal," Marcus said, scanning the latest communication from the district attorney's office. 2 years in minimum security prison, plus 5 years of probation and full restitution. "And if she doesn't take the plea?" "Then she faces up to 10 years on the embezzlement charges alone," Marcus replied. "Her attorney knows she doesn't have a defense. The evidence is overwhelming." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor vengeance, just a quiet certainty that justice would be served. "Marcus," I said carefully, "how are you doing with all of this?" "Really?" My son was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the tree-lined street where early commuters were heading to work. "Mom, I keep thinking about how blind I was," he said finally. "Sophia convinced me that taking care of you meant making decisions for you, treating you like you couldn't handle your own life. I never stopped to consider that maybe she was the one who needed managing." "She's very good at manipulation," I replied gently. "That's how predators operate. They isolate their targets from people who might see through their lies." "But you saw through her immediately, didn't you?" I considered the question. I suspected something wasn't right, but I didn't know the scope of her deception until I started investigating. What I did know was that someone who truly loved you wouldn't try to isolate you from your family. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I never realized how strong and brilliant you've always been. I let Sophia convince me that you were declining, that you needed to be managed instead of respected. I'm so sorry." "You were trying to be a good son," I said. "Sophia exploited that love and used it against both of us." Giuseppe emerged from the kitchen carrying a plate of fresh biscotti, his face lighting up when he saw Marcus. "Marcus!" he exclaimed, setting the plate between us. "Have you spoken to your mother about our idea?" I raised an eyebrow. "What idea?" Marcus grinned, looking more like the boy I'd raised than the stressed man he'd become during his marriage to Sophia. "Giuseppe thinks you should write a cookbook," he said. "All of Maria's family recipes, plus the stories behind them. He says you're the only one who speaks enough Italian to capture the racco. All history of each dish." "Mrs. Thompson," Giuseppe said earnestly, "these recipes have been in Maria's family for 5 generations. They should be preserved properly with the stories of the women who created them. You understand our culture, our language, our traditions. You could write something beautiful." I looked around the restaurant, at the photos of Giuseppe and Maria's ancestors on the walls, at the copper pots that had belonged to Maria's grandmother, at the handwritten recipe cards tucked behind the bar, and saw not just a business I'd purchased, but a legacy I'd helped preserve. "Sometimes we must fight for respect," I said finally, "but love always wins in the end." As I sit in my restaurant, surrounded by family recipes and genuine love, I'm reminded that respect isn't given freely. Sometimes it must be earned through strength, wisdom, and the courage to stand up for what's right. 1 year later, as I write this story in my home office, the same room where I planned Sophia's downfall, I'm reflecting on what we've all learned from this experience. Sophia completed her plea agreement and is serving 18 months in a minimum security facility while paying restitution to Marcus's business clients. Her attorney tells me she's been a model prisoner, participating in financial literacy classes and anger management counseling. Perhaps prison will give her the perspective she lacked as a free woman. Marcus has rebuilt his accounting practice stronger than before, with new clients who admire his integrity in handling his personal crisis. He's also begun dating Sarah, an elementary school teacher who treats me with the respect and warmth I remember from my early relationship with his father. More importantly, she makes Marcus laugh, something Sophia never did. Giuseppe and Maria have become the unofficial grandparents I never had. They've taught me Sicilian recipes that predate written records, and I've helped them navigate the business aspects of their renaissance. Maria's cookbook, 5 Generations, Recipes and Stories from a Sicilian Kitchen, will be published next spring by a local press that specializes in preserving immigrant food traditions. But the most important lesson came from an unexpected source. Last month, I was having lunch at Bella Milano when a woman approached my table. She was probably in her 50s, well-dressed but tired-looking, with the careful posture of someone carrying invisible burdens. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "Are you Abigail Thompson, the woman who dealt with the daughter-in-law situation?" I invited her to sit down, and over coffee, she told me her story. Her son's wife had been systematically isolating him from family, making financial demands, and laying groundwork to have her declared incompetent. The parallels to my own experience were striking. "What should I do?" she asked. "Everyone says I should just accept it, that I'm too old to fight back." I looked at this woman, intelligent, accomplished, but beaten down by months of psychological manipulation, and saw myself a year earlier. "Never underestimate someone because of their age," I told her. "Wisdom comes with experience, and experience teaches us that sometimes quiet people are the most dangerous when pushed too far." I gave her Robert Morrison's card and the name of the forensic accountant who'd helped me. 6 months later, she called to tell me her daughter-in-law was facing criminal charges for financial elder abuse and her son was filing for divorce. "You showed me that I didn't have to be a victim," she said. "You showed me that fighting back doesn't make you vindictive. It makes you strong." That conversation made me realize that my story isn't just about one family's dysfunction. It's about a pattern of abuse that happens when people assume age equals weakness, when they mistake kindness for stupidity, when they believe that someone who's lived 7 decades couldn't possibly outsmart someone in their 30s. They're wrong. The elderly woman they're trying to manipulate might be a former CEO who speaks 4 languages. She might have investment accounts they can't imagine, and professional contacts they've never considered. She might have spent 30 years learning how to read people, negotiate deals, and protect what matters most. Most importantly, she might have the patience to watch, listen, and plan while they underestimate her completely. To everyone watching who feels underestimated or disrespected by family, remember that you have more power than you know. Document everything. Protect your assets. Seek legal advice. And never let anyone convince you that age makes you less capable of fighting for what's right. Family isn't just about blood. It's about respect, love, and standing by each other through difficult times. When someone violates those principles, they forfeit the protection that family relationships provide. Sometimes the quiet ones are the most dangerous when we've been pushed too far. Giuseppe often tells his customers that the best revenge is a life well lived. I prefer to think of what I did as justice served with a side of wisdom. Thanks for listening to my story, and remember, respect your elders, because you never know what we're capable of. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is remind each other that we're not alone. And if you're dealing with a Sophia of your own, remember, patience, documentation, and professional help can move mountains. Even when those mountains think they're smarter than you are,